Hello, my name is Chard deNiord. I'm the Poet Laureate of Vermont, and this is Poet Speak. This week I'm happy to welcome Arlene Distler to Poet Speak. Arlene came to poetry late after studying the visual arts, learning the craft through retreats and workshops with the poets Galway Kinnell, Marge Piercy, and Carolyn Kizer, among others. She has received grants from the Vermont Arts Council and the Vermont Arts Studio, and has attended retreats at the Phoenicia Center, Omega Institute, Frost Place, and the Vermont Studio Center. Arlene's poetry has been published in online and print journals and in anthologies, including A Taste of Poetry from the Walt Whitman Foundation, Birch Song Poetry Centered in Vermont, which is an anthology of Vermont poets, from Blue Line Press, and Freedom, Just Another Word from Outrider Press, as well as 2 Right Action anthologies. In 2014, Finishing Line Press published her chapbook, Voices Like Wind Chimes, and as yet unpublished full-length manuscript, Just This Body, was a finalist for the 2017 Richard Snyder Prize from Ashland Poetry Press. Arlene is co-founder and longtime member of Right Action, a writers' networking and advocacy organization based in Brattleboro. In recent years, she's been finding the poetry in shape, her poetry, in shape and color as a ceramicist. So welcome, Arlene, to Poet Speak.
Thank you.
Wondering if you might start with a poem.
Sure.
And then we'll talk a little bit about both your work as a poet and your work in the community.
Okay. This is a fairly recent poem. I take the train Amtrak to New York on occasion, and this was inspired by those trips. Northeast Corridor, soot blackened as diseased lungs, bricked up arches, shattered windows, passages that lead nowhere. New World version of ancient ruins, unholy temples of industry. Even now they seem to exude heat, scent of brows fragrant with sweat. Rubble like sloughed skin covers the ground, bones left standing with stories to tell. Some of us tried to listen. These tracks laid down with muscle, steel spike, and hammer, sent wares north, south, west. Speeds us past this scarred past, landscape of fever dreams, discarded washing machines, stoves, chairs, tires dumped where nobody cares. Landscape of the forgotten, maybe even the forsaken, between tidy main streets, mansions with manicured lawns, the America we show and tell.
Thank you. Wonderful poem.
Thank you.
Did you write that on the train, or did you wait till you got off the train?
Those images are just seared on my brain because I've done it so many times.
Yeah.
And there's something that is very compelling about the ruins of the industrial age.
That you see along the railroad.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Could you read the first stanza again? I thought that was a nice, really nice opening to the poem, Northeast Corridor.
Soot blackened as diseased lungs, bricked up arches, shattered windows, passageways that lead nowhere. New World version of ancient ruins, unholy temples of industry. Even now they seem to exude heat, scent of brows fragrant with sweat.
Nice.
Thank you.
Now, your poetry is just full of images, and this is interesting to me because you started out as a painter.
Right.
right?
Right.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the nexus between,
How
your painting, and I don't know if you're still painting or working as an artist, and your work, your poetry, that I know you've been working really hard on for the last 20, 30 years.
So, yes, I went to art school.
I didn't know
for
that.
painting.
Where did you go?
RISD.
You went to RISD. Yeah.
And I love painting. But I made a choice to do a homesteading trip, journey. And my husband and I moved to a very isolated area.
Where was that?
Reedsboro.
Reedsboro, yeah.
In the hills.
Right.
And I had 4 kids pretty quickly. 3 in Reedsboro, and then my youngest, Ezra, was born in Brattleboro.
Right.
But anyway, with all these children and no plumbing.
Hard to do your
and
art.
no plumbing,
Yeah.
hard to set up an easel and paint.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard scrabble.
Yeah.
So I'd always loved to write. I used to get complimented on my letters as a young person. So it was much easier to lock the bedroom door, and write as my means of expression.
Were you frustrated, though, in not being able to paint as much as you wanted also?
I still did do, not painting full on, but sometimes I could draw. And I drew with my kids a lot. They're all in the arts in one way or the other.
Yes, I would like to just interrupt you briefly and say that one of your children, Erin, was my student at the Putney School, and who has gone on to become a internationally renowned sculptor, and is now living in London, and could draw like the Dickens.
Yeah.
Could draw like, so he must have inherited this from you.
Well, and took that ball and ran with it.
What's that?
Took that ball and ran with it way further.
But very courageously pursued it without much, income, and has gone on now to become so well known and accomplished.
He does, he'd still like to be able to do his own work more than he does. He's got a little family. He's got a daughter, and trying to make a living.
What you went through also. Yeah.
But he really has to bring the money in. I have to say I had some money from family that helped us buy the house in Reedsboro and the property. But for him, it's essential to have income.
Right. So you started writing then in Reedsboro, it sounds like, more seriously.
The very, really just very beginnings. A few little things. The poem that kind of opened me up to the world of poetry, somehow opened my heart, was a poem about the Vietnam War, actually.
Oh, really?
It was after watching the televised commemoration, the opening of the wall in D.C.
Right.
And I don't want to start getting emotional about it, it's still there. These veterans sat face front the camera and told their stories.
Right.
And it was for somebody who was heavy duty into the protest, war protest.
Right.
Went to D.C., marched, etc. It was quite an experience to open myself to that. And so I wrote a poem, not a very good one, and I'm not going to read it. I'm not even sure where it is, but it was my feelings about all that.
Yeah, I don't think that gets mentioned often enough in discussing poets' careers, that it's often the bad poems or the poems that don't endure very well over the years that spur and inspire young writers to write again and to write again. There's still something in those poems that is essential as far as their sensibility and as far as their early work and as far as their just their ambition to keep writing.
So I have to say, it wasn't like, gosh, I can write a better poem or I can do better than that.
Mm-hmm.
It really was just opened my heart to what poetry is.
And what was that? What did you think it was at the time, and maybe still do?
What is poetry?
Yeah, what was it that opened your heart specifically, as far as the language, as far as the act of writing poetry? That bit you,
Well,
like a big, literary bug that continues to infect you.
I guess just the idea that you can express what's in your heart with words.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little ditty that would go in my head, which was, and I never wrote this, poetry's for real. You can say what you feel.
Oh, very nice. Did you make that up?
I did. And it just
Poetry's for real. You can say what you feel. Do you remember what poet it was that you said there was a poem that you read by somebody during the Vietnam War that encouraged you to write?
No, it wasn't that, because I wasn't even reading poetry.
So you were talking about the poem that you wrote,
Right.
not a poem that someone else wrote. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so it was just that scene of the veterans facing the wall that moved you to write that poem
Right.
initially. Okay.
Right.
Because there is a fabulous poem about that by the great poet Yusuf Komunyakaa called "Facing It," meaning facing that wall. Of course, he was a veteran, and is such a powerful poem. Yeah.
Wow. You'll have to remind me of that,
Okay.
so I can write it down.
So you just kept writing.
Yes, I did. It was not so easy. I didn't write a ton because I had small kids and living out in the sticks
with
and no plumbing.
Plumbing.
You know.
Sounds like Ruth Stone a little bit. You know? She lived that way for so many years.
Well, I met
the great
Ruth.
Vermont poet.
I met Ruth, and we had this connection. I didn't know that about her, but we definitely had a connection. We took a picture together before there were selfies.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting.
And I love her poetry.
Yeah, me too. So you ended up studying with some pretty well-known poets, Galway Kinnell and Carolyn Kizer and Marge Piercy. You went away to workshops.
David
Wojan, right?
Yes, and for some of those, for the Galway Kinnell workshops, you did have to submit work, and that was at the Phoenicia Center.
Oh, yeah, I've never heard of that.
Well, it was in Phoenicia, New York.
Oh.
And it was a center. It was kind of like Omega Institute. It wasn't a writing center. And I don't think it exists anymore. But it was a great little workshop.
Right. Well, I want you to read some more poetry, but I first want to ask you about the genesis of Write Action. Because you ended up not only continuing to write and publishing eventually, but founding Write Action, which has been so vital to the writing community in Brattleboro and the surrounding area.
So I co-founded it with Marge Piercy.
Yeah.
We were, partners.
Yeah. Could you just say a few words about Marty, because people who are maybe too young to remember Marty need to know who he was.
Well, he was a journalist. and an author of nonfiction books. He wrote a wonderful book about Abby Hoffman.
Right.
And actually, one of the authors for this year's Lit Fest has a fictionalized book that centers around Abby.
Yeah.
So I'm anxious to meet him.
Who is that? Do you remember his
Gosh,
name?
I can't.
That's okay. It's okay.
It's not a household
Okay.
word, but,
All right.
but it's up on the website.
Okay. This
And
you're talking about the Brattleboro Literary Festival, which
Brattleboro
is
Literary
happening
Festival.
from August 17th to the 19th. 20th. Sorry, right, the 20th. Right here in Brattleboro.
Yeah. So, and his book is called Revolutionaries.
Uh-huh.
And Marty stuttered. He had a severe stutter.
Right.
And I think it was the last book he wrote was called Stuttering, A Life Bound Up in Words.
Yes. A great title.
And what a wonderful book. It's actually so beloved by the stuttering community. You know, it has Marty's inimitable humor
Yeah.
and upbeatness.
Yeah.
He struggled
Right.
with, you know, and
Yeah.
so he wasn't a big fan of therapies
Right.
because they didn't work for him.
Right.
After he left the therapist office,
Didn't work.
it was kind
Right.
of back to.
Yeah.
So the direction he went in is acceptance, self-acceptance, and self-love. So important because there's a stuttering and there's something called the secondary effects of stuttering, which are even more awful, which is people just become
avoiding
afraid
you, to talk to you, yeah.
speak, and
Right.
all kinds of, you know, self.
And for someone who is smart and brilliant and talented as Marty, that must have been pretty tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ultimately, he did not let stuttering stand in his way.
Yeah.
And the idea of acceptance, self-acceptance, just was huge for him. And he went to Toastmasters with a bunch of other people that stutter.
Wow.
And that was life-changing.
He learned to give
for him.
toasts? Yeah.
Well, Toastmasters is just in general public speaking.
Uh-huh.
Which I do not like and don't do well either,
Me
and I've
either.
thought about
No.
going there.
Me either.
But so it really was a huge help for him.
Uh-huh. And he wrote, we should say, he wrote some of the most brilliant editorials and articles about
yes.
politics from a leftist position that are classics. And can be, and people are still reading today.
Yes.
But he wrote primarily for the Reformer,
The Reformer.
but the other papers as well.
He had a column in the Reformer, but he got syndicated.
He was that good.
The
Yeah.
Populist, something populist, a few.
The Progressive must have picked up some of his
Yes.
pieces as well. But his language, his pieces are too valuable, really, to be lost. They endure. They're not just topical, they're not just of the period. They endure very, very well.
And I have to tell you, it was my intention to bring out a book of his columns.
Oh, right.
And I approached
Good.
several presses.
Yeah.
I think because he's no longer alive
Yeah.
and couldn't do the circuit,
Right.
they weren't interested.
Well, let's see if we can pursue that with some others.
I mean, that idea
Yeah.
has not
Go on.
gone,
Yeah,
for
good.
sure.
So you two founded Right Action, and you were writing
Yeah.
primarily poetry, and of course Marty was writing nonfiction, and it must have just started with a few members.
Well, something happened, a specific event that brought it about. We had been on the Cape, and we were in Provincetown when something called the ride. It was a bike ride for cancer. patients.
Marty succumbed to cancer.
He did, but
Yeah. That has
has
nothing to do with it,
nothing
right.
to do with it. And so these people had ridden. It was Pan, Massachusetts. They'd ridden a road across the state, and we just happened to be in P-Town when they finished. And boy, that was so moving to be there. You know,
Yeah.
People were so happy, and so there was that. We get home, and there was a big article in the paper about a woman who had her computer stolen. She didn't have any insurance, and she was, as all of us writers do, she was living close to the margin, right? And a lot of people knew her. This history is around, so I can say it was Martha Ramsey. And we had the thought, those people in P-Town, if they could do what they love to help somebody, maybe us writers can do something we love.
Great. No, I didn't know that story. That's a great story.
Yeah. And so we had, a few of us got together, and we had this kind of marathon reading at the Common Ground.
Right.
And it went just for hours and hours, and people were exhausted after. You had to pay to be there. So we raised enough to buy her a new computer. And people afterwards said, this was so great. We want to do this again. And it was just like, we're a force in the community, us writers. So eventually enough of those whispers in our ear, we decided to see if we could make it an ongoing thing.
And it grew and grew and is going strong today. And that was what, 30 years ago?
No.
40?
Oh, no.
50?
That was just 2000.
Oh, that was just 2000.
The reading for Martha happened in 99.
Okay.
And then we became incorporated in 2000.
Okay, so 20 years ago.
20, yeah.
Yeah, which is a while. And how many members are there now?
Well, we have a database of almost 500.
Wow. And you have a contest every year?
We do.
And you put out 2 pretty big anthologies at this point?
Oh, over those years, yeah. The second one was for the 10th anniversary.
And these are primarily local voices about poets and fiction writers and nonfiction as well, or mainly?
Mainly fiction and poetry.
Right.
There's some nonfiction.
Yeah, and so just it's this vital organization group, fellow writers who get together. How often? How often to?
Well, the board meets once a month.
Yeah.
And, we have events. We are partners since it started with the Literary Festival.
Right, and you give a reading at the Literary Festival, right?
There's 2. There's something called the Spotlight Reading, which is Saturday afternoon, and that is for people just within our community who have published a book in the past year.
Yeah, and so there's quite a few who have.
It's kind of amazing. Every year I think, well, not going to be able to find anybody this year. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So there's actually, I think, 7 readers this year.
Yeah.
And then we have an open reading in the evening.
This is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful. And
we also give senior awards at the high school.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. One is the Marty Jaser Journalism Award for Journalism.
Yeah.
And one is Right Action Creative Writing.
So you've kind of created a really kind of vital acceptance of writing in the community. Not just that, but a kind of really contagious spirit to write. And
we'd like to think,
you know, and it's just such fertile ground for for folks who are both beginning writing and who've written, like, as you did yourself for quite a while before you started publishing.
I'd like to think that we've given a little
Yeah.
encouragement.
Huge. It's been huge. It's been huge. Yeah. Well, would you mind reading another poem? You know, I love
Sure.
your fish poem.
Sure.
If you could read that. I mean, I love a lot of them, but that one, I think that one would sound great.
The Fish Counter. The young man peers out from behind thin-rimmed glasses, fixes his small dark eyes, fine chiseled nose, sets his sights. He goes to the ladder on the dam, and there, looking through a small square, tallies up the fish. You have to watch every minute, he says, or you might miss one. So 6 hours at a stretch, he stares and records trout, salmon, lamprey, quietly says, Hosanna for each one that passes. Sometimes he goes upriver, scoops them out and tags them, the way fish and wildlife tracks their destinies. In Chinatown, men size up the silvery supplicants, laying dumb-eyed on beds of ice, mythic bringers of good fortune. People cook them whole, as if taking in the completeness of fish were a rite of return.
Very nice.
Thanks.
That's really wonderful language. Do you remember what inspired that poem?
I actually met the person who was a roommate of a friend's who did this.
Ah.
And so it was imagining what it was like for him, and
Great.
some of his words are in there.
Now you have a pretty new manuscript that's you've been working on for a couple years now, and are adding to it, and I think, or revising
yes,
it. But I hope that sees the light of publishing.
Thank you so much.
You know, soon. You've worked with Peacock a little bit, who's a well-known
Molly
poet,
Peacock,
Molly
yes.
Peacock, and
Yes,
others.
she was wonderful.
Yeah.
To work with. Tim Mayo has also worked with her.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim has appeared on Poet Speak several months ago.
I imagine.
Yep.
He's a wonderful poet.
Yeah. So, where do you see your more recent poetry going at this point, as far as your themes? Or are you continuing to write about the same big themes?
So, I have several poems about my Reedsboro years. And that's been tugging, like, I'd like to have a chapbook.
Right.
And I've got a title for it.
What is the title, if you don't mind me asking?
What is the title? Reedsboro Swede.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And I've got a poem called Song of Jonathan. I could read.
Okay.
This also is about Reedsboro, land of my four.
I think it'd be fascinating to hear. Maybe we could close with one of your Reedsboro poems. But first I want to ask you, you've described this very sort of close to the earth existence in Reedsboro. When you were a young mother and raising 4 children who were, a year, 2 years apart?
Well, for the last 2 were 2 years apart.
Yes, so pretty close, though.
Yes.
I'm curious. Do you look back on that time with any nostalgia?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to get that.
I wouldn't say
straight.
nostalgia, but it was an intense time. And the land was intense. The living on it was intense.
Yeah.
So it
This was a time when a lot of people were moving out into the woods and homesteading, right?
Yes,
in the late
it
60s, early
was,
70s.
and
So it was
that's
kind of
when Packer Corners.
Packers Corner started up. So this was a kind of mecca, this area,
It's true,
for doing that.
but Reedsboro
Was not hospitable.
not so much a mecca.
Right.
You know, there were a few crash pads
Yeah.
that apparently were known.
Right.
We were not smart enough to do it as a commune. It was
Right.
just us,
Right.
my husband Alan and I.
Yes. Yes.
So we did it the hard way,
You sure did.
I have to say.
But you've gotten a lot of material.
A lot of material.
So let's read one of your Reedsboro poems.
And I have to say, for a kid who grew up on Miami Beach,
You grew up on Miami Beach?
it was really important to me to know that the whole survival thing,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, I had no idea you grew up on Miami
in the
Beach.
shadow of the Fontainebleau Hotel.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, so as I said, I have several. This is my most recent.
Sure.
Land of my foremothers, I return to an ancestral homeland, one I didn't know except through stories, the Jewish shtetls of Russia, houses barely big enough for the lives they contained. We shivered, spent days around the wood stove, clouds swooping low over the trees, our rooftop bringing snow, hail, lightning that cracked with frightening zeal. Nothing was ordinary. A weeping willow sighed when an arrow pierced its bark. UFOs were a sight my son swears to still. One night, a flood of light woke us. Were we beamed up? Probably. Most townsfolk didn't broach the hill. Indian hunting grounds, they said. Now Jewish hunting grounds, too, with East European roots. We stalked a poetic life, farmed, foraged for star-leaved Indian cucumber root, made peace with the spirits. Chekhov whispered in my ear.
Oh, what wonderful. Wonderful. What did Chekhov whisper in your ear?
Moscow. the yearning to be
Yeah.
someplace that was exciting.
Yeah. So even though this was a pretty rough life, right? Sort of hand to mouth and kind of survivalist almost, right? In Reedsboro.
Yeah.
It still haunts you as a memory of, in some way. And it's not nostalgia, as you say, but it's something. What would you call it? That you're kind of memorializing here.
Right. It was a time in my life that was kind of, as I said the other day, I was at a reading. It was kind of a crucible for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. Not Miami.
It was where I grew. No, as like real growing up.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Learning about love,
Yeah.
about what's hard about love and relationship. Learning to love the land and be part of it. There was a lot of learning.
And that all seems pretty darn valuable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It does. And is.
And you're still writing about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this will be contained. I mean, there are poems about Reedsboro in voices like Wind Chimes and the new collection. But I feel, because this theme seems to come up, and I feel I have more to say about it, I want to do this chapbook.
Reedsboro Suite.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Arlene, it's been wonderful talking to you. And
Thank you.
I'm so happy you could be here today and talk about your career, your life, your poems. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks so much, Chard.
You're welcome.